Welcome, everyone. We're glad to have you here today for our July All Hands on Deck call. Really appreciate your time, and I think you're going to really enjoy this session today. I haven't been able to hear Ben speak before, but all of my coworkers have, and they've been very excited about him. But yeah, I'm excited to hear from him too, so I'm sure you guys will learn a lot from him today. Before I turn it over to Ben, though, I just wanted to share in the chat one of our new resources that we have. It's a handout. It's called Age Appropriate Strategies to Help Children Impacted by Substance Use Disorder. So I have that handout there in the chat that has some quick tips on it, but also down at the bottom, there's a training video. And that training video is just about 14 minutes long, but just a new resource that we have available. So wanted to make sure everyone was aware of that and share that with you all so you had access. All right. Think we got that all in there. So I think we are ready to start. So Ben, welcome. We're glad to have you here, and I'm turning it over to you.
Thanks a lot, Carrie. Hi, everybody. It's nice of you to take some time in the middle of the week to do this. I always really appreciate seeing people who show up at weird times like this because you don't have to be here, obviously. Nobody's forcing this one. And I think that continuing to learn is so important inside of our field. It's one of these tools that we have to fight the I don't know, the doldrums that we can get because we do hard work. And I feel like the more I sit in stuff and try to intentionally learn, the fresher it keeps me. Um, anyway, I stopped speaking, and I don't. Nikki had mentioned not having a chance. I used to speak quite a bit, and it was actually a pretty big part of my life, and it was how I sustained my world for a long time. And in an effort to bring more balance to my life, you'll see some of the other things I do. I think this is probably the first talk I've given in 2026. And the reason why I agreed to it is because of the esteem that I hold DEC in. I'm from Colorado and I'm in Colorado right now. And as some of you may know, DEC started in Colorado. And I was actually really good friends with the woman who started it. We used to babysit each other's kids because we each had adoptive kids in our background. And one of my absolute favorite things about this organization is at its root, it's born out of a compassion for the people who are affected by substance use disorder, which is even those of us who experience substance use disorder. But this was a very rare organization in my mind that was truly built, especially around law enforcement, real rare, was really built around compassion instead of anger and frustration, which also has its place. I mean, thank God MAD started when it did and how it did in the 80s. But I love this organization, and that's why I'm a part of this. So let me jump into it. They gave me a very wide berth here to talk about, and so I am usually I get to talk about weed, and I'm not this time because they gave me a ton to talk about. So I kind of want to talk about the continuum of this addiction, treatment, and recovery. And since I've never given this talk before, and this is new information, well, it's not new information. It's newly organized information by me. We'll see where it goes. I think. Yep. Okay, so here's just a little bit of background. I won't belabor this at all, I promise. My day jobs right now are three: NRT behavioral health, which is called which stands for, and it's an old 12-step thing, if any of you are familiar, next right thing. And we have a full continuum of care inside of Colorado with an emphasis on Medicaid treatment, all from detox all the way through outpatient, and have been making a lot of efforts and finally have something going up in Montana as well with an emphasis on indigenous specific treatment. The EAP is a company called Union EAP that I don't run NRT anymore. We have a CEO who does a much better job than I am. I still run Union EAP, which is an employee assistance program specifically for skilled trades and organized labor. So we cover about 55,000 construction workers around the country with an EAP. And then I consult a bit inside of labor, not speaking anymore. The next relevant thing I think about me, and something we're going to talk quite a bit about actually here, because what I try to do is, I don't know, hopefully it works. my own journey is both metaphor and example for some of the points that I want to make. But I'm somebody in long-term recovery. I got sober on June 15th of 1996. So picked up 30 years this year, which was a trip because I don't feel that old, except for in the mornings and at night too, because the other guys in the audience will understand this, because now at night I have to pee like 19 times. But that and like the stiffness of my knees in the morning, I feel you, James. Um, so I've had the recovery thing down for a long time. The thing I want to be real vocal about and make sure we address here too is I'm also somebody who struggles with his mental health and is in recovery, if you will, from that. I've got a major depressive disorder. In fact, some of the very first memories I have, which started about 7, which we all think is kind of weird. I don't remember much before that, were kind of fascinations with ending my life and an excitement and a desire to do that. So I've struggled with the suicidal ideations and the depression, and since then, post-traumatic stress disorder. And I treat that pretty aggressively with weekly psychotherapy. I'm actually on a 2 a week right now because when your psychologist says, "Hey, why don't we talk a few more times between now and then?" It's probably a good idea to listen to her. And medication, as well as a lot of lifestyle stuff. For me, intentional sleep, hygiene, as well as fitness and diet are also important to help with my mental health. But I want to be real clear about that one because the two of them intersect so much. And I think one of the things that we tend to do is sometimes to think about this a little bit too pragmatically. And we will say, well, is that the addiction or is that the mental health? And my experience here will tell you that the answer is yes. It usually is. I got into this field in 2007 when my climbing partner and I started a small nonprofit in Boulder that became a large one called Phoenix Multisport. That's now called the Phoenix. From there, I went to the University of Colorado Hospital inside of their behavioral health program and spent 5 years. While I was there, I wrote a book called Weed Inc., wrote a follow-up to it in 2024 called Weed Inked. And so far, my colleague and I from UCH, until somebody publishes something better, we have the only published best practice treatment for cannabis use disorder in a medical manual that's used inside of med schools called Cannabis and Medicine and Evidence-Based Approach. So cannabis addiction and treatment has always been a big thing for me, and I THC instead of cannabis. I gave a TED Talk in 2017 that some people cared about. There were a bunch of views on it, and I spent a little bit of time consulting still inside of athletics, labor, and treatment. Okay, so that's me. What we're looking at here, for any of you who are on the professional side of this thing, is something that you're probably familiar with. These are the diagnostic criteria for a substance use disorder. And don't worry, I'm not reading through all of them or anything. I'm not a slide reader. But I want to put them up here because one, actually, if you're not aware of these, this is a great thing to take a picture of or print. I actually have this like literally printed and on my desk at home, because these are the things that we can say objectively. If you meet 2 or 3 of these criteria, you have a mild substance use disorder. And we're kind of like, okay, we should keep an eye on that. If it's in an adolescent or youth, it's pretty serious. But if it's in an adult, it usually looks like college. But 2 or 3 criteria, and we're like, all right, let's keep an eye on it. 4 or 5, it's time for us to get involved here. And if you have 6 or more, this is the kind of like break glass in case of emergency. This is a severe substance use disorder, what I suffered from when I was young and what all of the people who we treat suffer from. And again, we've got about 100 beds in Colorado, so we see a lot. And since it is Medicaid, we tend to get kind of some of the harder cases. The point that I want to make to you here moving forward is that we are able to objectively diagnose somebody who has substance use disorder or addiction and work with that and look at the severity and work with that. One of the things that we neglect a lot, and where I will be coming back to this is an objectively diagnosable condition. This isn't something that people are just kind of making up and saying, oh, here's something I suffer from. It's very real. One of the things that I think we forget about when we're doing this is the acute mental health component to addiction. Because like I said before, people say all the time, is this addiction or is this mental health? And again, the answer is yes. It's really important moving forward as I get into some of the details here because I'm really committed in this presentation to give you some very practical details to walk away with that I think might help you in working with people. It's really important for you to understand and to remember that the data would indicate that the majority of people who have a substance use disorder are also struggling from a mental health disorder. And a lot of them have what we would refer to as acute psychosis. So that means it's just happening kind of here and now, and it's probably drug induced. We hope that it doesn't become chronic. But the things that we look for with the psychotic disorder, some of the diagnostic criteria here are delusions. And I will read this one because it's really important. A strongly held false belief that are resistant to reason or confrontation with actual fact. When the person comes in and says, and usually this is either amphetamines or THC, I'm being tracked by the mafia and I can't speak anything real here because they're going to hear it and they've got a contract out on me. And there's a camera in that light bulb. And when we remove the light bulb and we show them that there is not a camera, when we give them the confrontation of the actual fact, they say, well, they obviously moved the camera. It's in the other light bulb. That's not crazy. I want you to put yourself in their position for a minute because to them, it's real. And that's scary stuff. From somebody who's been there before, something that is objectively able to be disproved is real to them. We all look at Nikki on our screen and we see Nikki has blonde hair and is wearing a jacket. It can be a very real thing for a person with acute psychosis to see that Nikki has her head is on fire and she's wearing a tank top. That's scary. This leads us into hallucinations, sensory experiences without external stimuli, hearing voices and seeing things. Again, the reason why this is, we tend to make light of this sometimes in the world, but if you could step back and put yourself in the position of a person who is hearing something that no one else is, even when they know that it's not real and we've educated them to it. And sometimes this is great with their patients who've really gotten kind of advanced in their stuff. They say, hang on, stop. And then we know something's presenting that they know isn't real, but it sure as hell looks like it. A lot of times they experience disorganized speech, incoherence, or frequent derailment of the thought process. So you're talking to somebody and you think it's going well and you're getting some logic, and then boom, they're off to the races talking about, I don't know, like the races or whatever. They're talking about NASCAR or horses, or it can be very frustrating. And one of the things I'm asking you to remember right now throughout the rest of this is that rather than feel frustrated because we think, oh my gosh, this person won't stay focused, we can have a little bit of grace for them and we can say, actually, maybe that disorganized speech comes from acute psychosis. And then grossly disorganized or chaotic behavior. Guys, the examples I could give of this are so myriad. What they have here is slight agitation to immobility. I picked a family member up about 2 years ago to take to treatment at an airport, and I couldn't find her. And when I did, she was literally laid on the ground with her bags to the side of her, and she couldn't get up. She wasn't even intoxicated. It was that level of acute psychosis. It's scary stuff for people. Okay, so now we've got this. Let's move forward into the how it plays out and how we can help people who have a substance use disorder as well as mental health concerns. And the thing I'm going to try here, and I hope it works, I never really get into my story a lot. This I only used for about 3 years, and I use in a very destructive way. I know a lot more about recovery than I do about other stuff and treatment than anything else. However, I think it's important if I can go back and I can share a little bit about what that felt like. It was really great at the beginning, and this is the problem with drugs. The problem with drugs is they work. The problem with drugs is they do the things to our brains that we want them to do. They just do it in a much larger volume than what is healthy. And the thing for me that I realized when I got high for the first time at 13 years old was that I finally felt a little bit normal. My dad's a retired preacher, and the first time I ever got high was THC, of course, and I smoked a joint outside of his church. And I remember thinking, oh my God, this is it. Like, I don't feel like everybody else is here and I'm all the way out here. And my brain finally calmed down for a minute, and like I got some clarity. And so I chased that thought. And the problem with me, somebody who has so much addiction and mental illness inside of his family, like my family tree is pretty awesome when it comes to the addiction and mental illness side. Um, I was in a lot of trouble from the beginning because I had that gene that kicked in. And my big problem was I didn't stick with one substance because I thought it was helpful. I kind of was in this school of thought that any time I could be intoxicated, it helped me feel better. And that ended up like, I mean, some pretty nasty stuff, like including huffing. I don't know if you remember in the 90s, that was kind of a thing. And it's not really good for you. And I I want you to understand this at first that like really nobody comes back to it because it sucked. We usually come back to it because there's this component to it that we're like either I like how that feels or thank God I can finally breathe. And that's what it was for me. I spent those first couple of months, and man, when I got high for the first time, like it probably wasn't much more than a month and a half till I was every day. Because it was such a relief to this brain of mine that was always screaming at me. Eventually, that ends up shifting. And the way that it shifts, for those of you who don't have this, for those of you who can enjoy a glass of wine with dinner, who can, a couple times a year go out with your girlfriends or your buddies and have one too many and take an Uber home and laugh about it the next day, this part doesn't apply to you. This applies to the addict side. And what happens is it really stops being fun and it starts being necessary. And then at some point, it shifts to scary, where we know what we're doing. This is one of the diagnostic criteria if you were to go back to substance use disorder. If we were to be in a good enough frame of mind, or if we were able to truly get honest and go deep, we would be able to tell you that we know that this is hurting us, not helping us. But we also can't really quit it because it's filling such a need in our lives. And for a lot of us, what we'll get to here in a minute, we didn't have access to mental health care. I grew up on public assistance. The idea of going to a psychiatrist or a shrink, okay, great. Like if the family doesn't have money for food, they sure as hell don't have money to send you to a doctor to talk about your feelings. I know that there's a lot of law enforcement that's connected with DEC. I don't know if anyone's on here from it, but the reason I wanted to mention this to you is that a lot of times inside of the journey of the addict, we experience interactions with law enforcement. And those interactions, from my experience, can be everything from destructive and furthering the problem to part of what helps get you out. If it had not been for the involvement of law enforcement in the legal system, I would be dead today. I had 3 court-ordered 90 and 90s that got me into it. The only reason, that's 90 meetings in 90 days, the only reason I stopped using was because I was being tested so often and I had a deferred charge, a felony that would have ended up going hard if I popped hot on it. I am so grateful for the people inside of law enforcement and the justice system who are there for us, and especially when they're there in the right ways, which is, again, something that I see that's so beautiful inside of DEC. So 2 really quick stories here. I had this, I was using in the age of pagers, and I woke up one morning and kept getting these pages from a number I didn't recognize. So eventually I called it back, and they said, Fairfax County Police. And I was like, oh, shit, and I hung it up real quick. And then they paged me and paged me and paged me again. And I was like, why do you keep paging me, Fairfax County Police? And they're like, is this Ben Cort? Bad news. Anyway, eventually I end up in there. My father's with me because I'm underage, and it was pretty serious stuff that we did that I got caught for. And we're in the interrogation room with kind of classic long table. And the police officer who was with us went really hard after me, trying to get me to say some stuff that would have helped their investigation, and really hard. And in fact, I remember this here. What am I? Probably 34 years later from this, I can still tell you, I remember when he looked at me and said, pieces of shit like you never do anything in the world. The culmination of this event was in me because I thought I was some tough guy, even though I was a 130 pounds soaking wet, skinny little thing. When I challenged him to a fist fight, and he took my handcuffs off and put his gun and badge on the table, and I was like, yeah, like I'm gonna fight a cop, like totally called my bluff. And but I left there pretty pissed and not determined to show him wrong by making something of myself. There's a big street brawl that I was in one time, and a lot of people fighting, and those are scary times. I was in a couple of them, three. And when it ended, I had been knocked more or less unconscious because I think while I fought a lot, I probably wasn't a very good fighter because I remember getting my butt kicked a whole lot. I was more or less unconscious when law enforcement came, and it was a female officer, and I was terrible to her. I said awful things to her. And at the end of it, I had the whole side of my face was swelled up. She offered me a ride home, and I accepted because I was a couple miles from home, and she put me in the front seat of her car. Whoa. And she talked. And the most striking thing about this, and again, the thing I remember, 30 whatever years later, is we got to my street and she stopped at the bottom of it and she said, I'm guessing you'd rather walk from here. Wow. Like she's thinking about what it would look like for me to roll up home in a cop car versus walk up there. There was something about that interaction that like stuck. I felt human, heard. To her, I was absolutely just another Wednesday. Again, back then, the greater DC area in the middle of the 1990s was a tough place to be a kid, and I'm sure it was a worse place to be a cop. But she did some stuff that meant something to me. But still, even then, the idea of getting out, the idea of stopping, was impossible because you just don't think it's doable. There's a secret. I have a friend who's a brilliant interventionist, and one of the things he says is he says, my secret is I know that deep down inside, they all want out. And we do. The problem is we just don't know how. And we're so scared of it. With one thing I'd like to ask you to remember, and we talk about this all the time in treatment with people, because one of the things we like to say in our treatment program is we never punish an addict for acting like an addict. When somebody does something, intense or crazy or whatever, like, well, yeah, of course, that's their job. Their job is to protect their addiction because their addiction is their family. It's their best friend. It's their God. They can't necessarily separate it from who self is. And so we got to remember, we would do well to remember that we can't really see a world where we don't have this in it. And then you add the mental health component to it, and you guys, it's like you got a brain that is working against everything good. You got this disease, you got this illness, you got whatever, people want to forget that debate. And this is like the one of them that your body is rebelling against and saying, no, do not get better. It'll kill you to get better. I'll tell you, and I won't it's a remarkable story. And it took place a couple days after June 15th of 1996. But when I finally made the decision to get sober, and it was, I had 3 court-ordered 90 and 90s. My mom got sober when I was 7. We didn't have babysitters or anything, so she would take us to the local AA club, and we'd set up in the back of it and like play while there were meetings going on. I'd had plenty of truth inside of me. Plenty of like knowledge that had been put in there about recovery. And the night that I decided that I actually wanted that, I made a decision. And I made a decision that I was going to change my life and I was going to try something different. And there's this great fallacy, you guys, inside of the world that non-addicts live inside of, where they think that that's all it takes. 2 days later, we were out of town. 2 days later, my friend Mike, who got me there, dropped me off at the house of a girl I was dating at the time. And we had been out of town for a week. And I went into the house and she had my drink. She had a couple of 40s of St. Ides, which was what I drank. And she had a quarter of weed and she had an 8 ball of Coke because she was really excited to party again because I got back. The decision that I'd made 2 days earlier became obsolete like this because I had to make the decision again. And I made the decision again to leave. And as I left and walked through the courtyard and the housing project that she lived in, everybody could hear, and she's yelling at me and saying terrible things about me. I had to make the decision again that I wasn't going to turn around and go back. And when I left, there's a liquor store right there that would sell anyone liquor anytime. Like you just walked in, and the 90s were great. And I used the payphone in front of that liquor store to page my friend Mike. And he called me. I said, "Can we go to a meeting?" Another choice. So something I'd ask you to keep in mind and remember is that our decisions to stay sober are made again and again and again and again. So having that consistent and constant support from you means so much. And now where we're going to shift, getting into the solution part of it, is that we, those of us on the rough side of it, we can become a part of the solution. One of the hard things for law enforcement a lot of the times is like one of the best examples of sample group bias I could ever imagine, right? Like they're only going to see you if you reoffend. It's not like they're going to pick you up for like volunteering at the local homeless shelter or whatever. And typically addicts aren't walking into the police station being like, "Hey guys, look, here's my 1 year coin. I got it. Thanks so much for arresting me." It's usually not how it works. I mean, it should be, but it's usually not how it works. We can be a powerful part of the solution. And I'm sure there are some people here who know that firsthand. And I'd ask you to remember that truth that, we can use those experiences for good stuff. Here's a couple of things you're going to keep in mind before your practical example part. A lot of the times it truly isn't a choice. I did love that old, and people miss this so much. There was some good stuff that actually happened from the whole Just Say No campaign and everything. It didn't consistently stay good, but we write it all off as terrible. And it really wasn't. There was some good stuff that happened inside of it. For me, one of them was that commercial that said, nobody signs up to be an addict or something like this. We didn't. It comes from some of the things below: mental illness and social factors and socioeconomic factors. And it wasn't the intent. And if I can remember that when I'm working with people, if I can go back to remembering that somewhere in there is a person who didn't have this before, a person that there was gentleness and there was kindness and there was understanding, and we can find that person again. I'd like you to keep in mind, as we said at the beginning with mental health, that logic simply does not apply. It was a frustrating thing for a lot of people when they'll say, "Well, I explained it to them, black and white, if, then, and they chose to do it. So whatever." You got to remember the instances of acute psychosis. The best story I have for this, I did a lot of work over the years with professional athletes and for a long time with NFL. And we were treating an NFL player, and he decided to leave early. And it was rough because he said he's like, "I'm done. I'm never drinking again. I'm never using again." Listen, as soon as anybody says that, you're like, "Oh God, you really need to stay here," because like today, sitting here 30 years sober, I'll tell you, yeah, it could end today if I'm not careful about things. And the tricky part about him leaving was part of the thing that his team put into place was if he left, he would forfeit his entire signing bonus. And he was like an actual, not everybody who plays professional sports makes a lot of money. This guy did. It was more money than I'll ever see in my entire lifetime that he was forfeiting. And I remember sitting there trying to talk reason into him, sitting in his room. He was putting shirts in his bag and clothes in his bag, and I was pulling them out and trying to put them back in the drawer, And as he left treatment and he got in the car that he had called, and thereby giving up literally millions of dollars. I remember one of my colleagues, somebody newer in the field, said, "What a dumbass." And I said, "Oh God, what an absolutely perfect example of powerlessness. That there was no logic in that. All he had like 9 more days till he completed it or something. Logic doesn't always apply to us. Sometimes you got to try other things." One thing I'd like you to keep in mind that in situations where we come in contact with forms of authority, we got a lot of expectations about you. And usually that you and authority are going to look a whole lot more like the cop who yelled at me than the one who dropped me off at the bottom of the street. And one of the nice things about us having expectations about you is you get a chance to break them. I told you I don't work inside of the treatment program anymore, which is good. The guy who runs it is way better than I'd ever be. But one of the things that I still get to do and I love to do is I go in there and I just greet new patients. We admit 4 or 5 people a day, and I love hanging out in the lobby and knowing their names when they come in and helping them carry their bags in, and then just sitting with them, acknowledging that this is probably one of the worst days of their lives, asking a few questions about family and pets and things over the years they have loved and might want to do again. That little thing a lot of the times changes this expectation they have of going into treatment and someone being like, "All right, take your clothes off, here's your shirts, pee in this can." Then we get a chance to break those expectations from go. Change is a really hard thing. I'm not going to spend too much time on that because I want to hit this one. The social and family factors are a big deal. And those of us who don't come from backgrounds where use is the norm, a real quick illustration, I think, will help you with this. There was another gentleman who played professional football, and he was doing great. He had like 60 some days sober, and we were having a conversation, and he was like, "Man, I'm not excited to go home for the holidays." And I was like, "Yeah, Christmas can suck with family, and it's hard, the stress." And he's like, "Oh man, I didn't tell you about no, like the stress of using. I didn't tell you about cannabis Christmas, did I?" "No, you didn't tell me about cannabis Christmas." He said, "Well, my grandma buys a couple ounces and it sits on the table, and she's got all of the accoutrements. She's got the bongs and she got the papers and she got the blunts to roll." And he said, "If I don't go there, I won't see my grandma, and I probably won't see a lot of my cousins." He's like, "But I don't think I can be in a house that's filled up with smoke and has all that weed on the table." And it's just a great illustration for some of us to remember that this is very normalized inside of a lot of cultures. In fact, one of the things I hear kind of regularly from men who we work with is this was like the initial connection point with their father, was when dad was finally like, "You're old enough to smoke a joint with me, son. Here, have a beer." And like it's this deep connection sometimes that they have with family that is a big deal. A lot of the times we've got such significant stress and trauma inside of our lives that it can lead us to be making bad decisions. A lot of the times we're looking at legal consequences, and we've got fear of physical harm that's around us, and we have financial harm is always on the right there when you're at that place. So sometimes, and again, I'd actually just keep this in mind when you're talking to us, there's this myriad of things behind us that's screaming for our attention. So even if we are in a good frame of mind, that can be really hard. But I will tell you that a shock to the system, when they interact with us professionally or personally, every one of them is an opportunity for that breaking point. Because at some point, all of us do have to break. Unfortunately, I've known a lot of people who that breaking point was mortality. But most of us have a place before then when we got an option and we can say, "Okay, I'm going to try this other way." At the very beginning of things, you see people at their worst, and I want you to remember that there is a whole other side to it. We see the we see the addict, but we see the addiction in that addict. We see the pain that they cause. We see the hurt that they bring to the world. I know a lot of people who, like myself, are doing something impossible by giving back. Yeah, screw it. I've said this in person before. I'll say it now to you guys. I've seen apathy sometimes in clinical work and social work and prevention, medical work and law enforcement. I see an apathy that leads to a dark humor that leads to an expectation of failure. A lot of the times it leads to us to speak in derogatory terms behind their backs. Just, what would you expect that junkie to do? If we ever get to a point where that apathy is bigger than our sympathy, you need to leave this field. Burnout happens in this field, and it's okay if you've got to a place where you just can't go any further with it. Or you need to recapture that because you need to remember that change is possible and there's real beauty on the other side of it. Because you don't just change a person when you do this. This is where we get to the root cause and mission of what DEC does. In the same way that addiction destroys families, because those ripples, recovery can help heal them. And not just the immediate family, but the families around. I've had a chance to work with so many people over the course of my recovery. And I like to think that every now and again, I touch one of them in a way that leads to some change that might affect their family. So if you can't find compassion for the addict, I'll bet you can find compassion for their kids or the kids they might have, because I didn't have mine till down the road. Their brothers, their sisters, their family. It's a really good trick to get you out of being angry at the addict when they do stuff. You think, okay, you have pissed me off so much today. I can't handle any more of this. I'm not doing this anymore for you until I get my head on straight. I'm going to do this for you kids. It's just a good little trick. I think that can help some. Oh, what happened? Listen, guys, respect is currency in a lot of circles. It's incredible how many people miss this, especially people who've got a little bit more street background, if you would. You walk in and you treat them respectfully, and it's going to give you the opportunity to actually speak with them. You need to be aware of eye contact. You need to be aware of body language. You need to be aware of how you address them. Sir and ma'am is something that I always go with, because a lot of the times these are folks who haven't been addressed with respect from somebody in a very, very long time. When you offer somebody basic human respect, they're a lot more likely to listen to you. And if you decide that you want to play this judgmental role with us, you better believe that we'll let you, because we expect that. We won't try to break you out of it. And here's where your resources are going to come in on the treatment side. Know your local resources, and it's more than professional. I'm going to cover the professional in just a minute here, but I'd really encourage you to know your local community 12-step program. If you don't, everybody, okay, here, one of these sections everybody needs to listen to. Stop, whatever you're doing, stop crushing candy or whatever. Find somebody in your local recovery community who can be your person. Go to an open AA meeting. You just go to Alcoholics Anonymous online. You look for meetings in your area. Any of them that have an O on it mean anyone can go to. And find somebody in there who raised their hands when they say who'd be willing to be a sponsor, who's been around a little bit, who you're like, oh, I really like what that person said, and ask them afterwards. Because if you got a person who you can call and say, I don't know what to do here, this guy's all screwed up, will you take him to a meeting? It's like part of our job. We kind of have to. They call it a 12-step call. Like, we're sort of obligated to do that. Know your local medical community, your treatment community, mental health. Knowing your local clergy and faith community can be incredible, as well as detox and all of that. And getting to that AA meeting would be a big deal. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the treatment side. Let's talk about the professionalized side of things, which has been my world for quite some time. Not everybody with substance use disorder is going to have access to treatment. In fact, the estimates are probably about 9% of people who meet the diagnostic criteria have access to treatment. I think that number is really, really skewed because it takes all socioeconomics into account when it does that. And I think that if you have private insurance or if you have the ability to write a check for the person, your odds are probably a lot higher that you'll get into that treatment. However, if you're dependent on community-based programs, Medicaid, and those of you not aware of this, like the $1.7 trillion that was cut from Medicaid over the next 10 years included a lot of behavioral health. Our rates for treatment literally cut in half overnight. So it's it's hard to get access for people who don't have means. My goal, my in life is to provide the highest quality of treatment I possibly can to people who don't have access, because like me, I didn't have the opportunity to go to treatment. There was no way that my family would have the money to make that happen. And I want you to understand that not everybody with a substance use disorder has access to it. However, the vast majority would benefit from some sort of treatment intervention. Treatment is no guarantee, but it typically improves the odds. With this caveat, I should have put an asterisk there, or italics, or put it in a whole. Not all treatment is equal. I tell folks all the time, I field these phone calls pretty regularly. I got a loved one, I have a what do I do? And the very first question we have to look at always is resources. And if there aren't any resources and we end up directing them to the local hospital and then to the Salvation Army, where they can stay for 45 days for free, then we do that, because typically any intervention is better than no intervention, with a caveat, so long as it's safe. There are places that are not safe, and that would be where we would want to steer away from. But not all treatment is created equal. In fact, it's a very frustrating thing inside of our world because we don't have standards. We run a hospital, and a lot of the times, I don't even know how many prescribers we employ. 15 psychologists, psychiatrists, psychiatric nurse practitioners, PAs, everybody who treats our patients is either a psychologist or a master's level licensed clinician. We don't have to do all of those things because there's not a requirement for them. So a lot of the times we're being compared to people who are like, oh, come here, we'll let you vape. Not all treatment is created equal. And it's a good idea to do some research into that before you do. Treatment, especially in a residential level, is the most important for someone who has mental health needs. One of the primary reasons being that, so I see my provider now weekly, my psychologist. I see my psychiatrist every 6 months, more when I have to mess with meds and change things. But a lot of times, if a good program has eyes on somebody for 2 or 3 weeks, we can get those meds perfect, because we're seeing them every day. We also can get a good treatment plan together. We can do a nice job of really understanding who they are and a foundation for their work. The people who can't get it, I got sober in 12-step, and I thank God that I did. And for a long time, I thought treatment wasn't necessary because I got that. The problem was I never really got to address my mental health issues in the same way that I did until I got into the professional side of it. All of the families, and the reason I put families in quote is the way that we define it, because we have a family program, and when the addict's in, everybody gets access to it, is we define a family as anyone that the addict tells us is family. Because that's just how it works. Sometimes it's old using buddies. Cool. Like if that's your family, that's your family. And the families of people with substance use disorder dramatically benefit from these interventions as well. Not just by proxy because things get easier in their world, but a lot of the times because they find things like Al-Anon, or they discover that there's a different way of doing things. The dance gets interrupted, and then they have a chance to change the way that they see the world too. So here are your standards of care. 1 to 3 days is typically your detox. This is a medical process. It can take as long as 3 weeks. It's very rare, but it can. This is typically somebody who's got very, very severe alcohol or benzo addiction. This is a medically managed process in which there is little to no what you would consider therapeutic work doing. They might go to a group or two. They're going to talk to counselors, but anybody who's trying to get into it with a person who's in this stage is just foolish. What this person needs is physical comfort and safety, because we need them. Before we can do anything with your brain, we need to get the substances out before we can get into it and realize, oh, this all probably comes back from an abusive parent or an assault when they were a kid or whatever. We've got to get you to stop vomiting. Okay? Maslow's hierarchy of need, really simple stuff, you guys. So detox is medical. That's where we're treating your body. with a little bit of your brain. Residential, ASAM would call that a 3.7 or 3.7M. ASAM would call residential a 3.5, which is usually about 30 days. There are some programs that'll take you out to 2 years, and God bless them. Almost all of them are for an indigent population who they basically pay for by their work or by their Social Security or Medicaid. But there certainly are programs. If you can afford it, I recommend that every single person, the Surgeon General's report that came out a few years back said everybody needs an individualized plan for a year. Treatment can go out to 2 years in a residential setting, but usually what you're going to be seeing is somebody who gets 30 days. And I'll give you a little trick to understand how this stuff works. You hear people say, well, my insurance pays for this. I can go, I'm insured. What your insurance will cover is what they deem, here's the language inside of it, medical necessity. So a lot of the times, while the program somebody checks into is 30 days, at the end of 4 or 5 days, your insurance is saying, we're no longer paying for this person. It's a really important thing when it comes back to not all rehabs being created equal, to find one that we know they're going to fight for a longer length of stay. Because the math on this one's really easy. The longer the stay, the better the outcomes. It's very, very linear math. Partial hospitalization, a lot of times, is a step down from residential, and that's where somebody will sleep in a supervised environment or a lightly supervised environment, a sober living, etc. And they'll program 5 days a week. That programming, when we do it, is 8 hours a day, like you were going to work. When you do PHP with us, it's still medically managed. But that's most of the time used as a step down out of residential. Sometimes people will enter the continuum of care there, but usually it's just because of means or the insurance company's not able to do it. And then here's a really interesting one: intensive outpatient, or you've probably referred to as IOP. That can be a way into the continuum of care. Some people start there and make it through the whole thing, or some people start there and we're like, oh, okay, this wasn't the right level for you. You need to go to rehab. You need to go to residential. And it's also used a lot of times as a step down. So somebody graduates, and that's why we have this program. Somebody finishes treatment successfully, and the next day they're in their IOP program, which is typically about 12 weeks. It's 3 3-hour sessions a week, and we do 1 hour individual session weekly. A lot of times that's a 1 session monthly, but whatever, it's better than nothing. So those are your levels of care that we have this. The recovery process at its core is non-professional, because we cannot stay under professional care forever. But it is supported by professionals, especially at the beginning. We need you. We need this professional help at the beginning of it, but you know that it's worked. When somebody gets to a place where they don't need that, they're getting it from their peers. And then you get, I mean, not never, obviously. Listen, you've heard enough of my story now. I see a psychotherapist every single week, and I see my psychiatrist every 6 months. They're still involved, but I'm not in a day-to-day with them anymore. I have moved more into a world where my peers are the ones who I rely on for that. Man, the number of times that I've heard people repeat this fallacy. Well, he drank, so clearly it didn't work. While relapse has not been a part of my story, and a lot of people I know, it hasn't been a part of theirs either. It doesn't have to be. It is a part of a lot of people's stories. And one of the things we like to say in AA, why we welcome them back with open arms, is in AA we say, well, we don't shoot our wounded. And something that's really hard for people sometimes professionally to grasp is, God, I put so much effort into them. Then they went to rehab for this amount of time. And then 2 weeks later, they drank. Well, the question I would have for you is, did they drink to the same severity? Did they call somebody and ask for help? Did they not shoot dope? Did they, was there remorse? Was there a feeling in there that changed it? Because recovery is not a linear process. Recovery does this, and that's okay, because life does this, and that's okay. So it's a really important thing for you to remember that somebody slipping back is not somebody failing. In the end, this gets defined by a non-professional support system, which is a beautiful thing. I would like to share with you about a 4-minute video, and I got 151, so we have time on this for a few questions on the back end of it. So think of what those might be. But I'd like to share a video with you, and you're going to need sound on this, you guys. Oh, I guess you have sound because you're listening to me. It's like turn your sound on. Well, I hope you are, unless you're just doing this at work to show the boss that you're learning. Um, Check this out. I love this because this is a reminder that there's a little bit of hope inside of recovery for people. What just happened here? Oh, dang it. Okay, let me try this again. I am awesome at this.
Ben, when you shared your screen, did you make sure you checked the share sound button?
I don't know. Tell me if you can hear it. Wait a second. There's no volume in.
We're not hearing it.
Damn it. Okay. How do I get
So,
to the share screen part?
so
Because this is
stop sharing is probably the easiest.
okay.
And then hit reshare. And there's a little square button on the right side is where it is on my screen that says share sound before you hit the blue share button. You seeing that?
Share sound. Oh my gosh, you're the best. Okay, sorry for the anticlimactic moment there. Let's go back. If I can go back. Yeah, okay, cool.
So this is living. Every single day is like a blessing we've been given. I keep my scars hidden behind the bars of this prison. I keep my flaws tucked right behind my front, sucking up this blunt. I don't give a, hey, what's up? How you been? Cool, man, I'm doing me. Chiller than the Arctic, but burning like a 3rd degree. I'm open like a surgery. I'm searching for a crutch. It's as natural as putting antiseptic on a cut. Heal me. I fiend for my fix. There's a void on the inside. I fill it up with fluff to avoid where my sins lie. I'm talking puppy dogs and ice cream. Caffeine, nicotine, puffing on a pipe dream. Daddy needs a new pair of anything. Maybe you relate. Lay your head upon my pillow, wake up with a clean slate. I thought that if I found out who I was, away from anything I'd ever tried to use to catch a buzz, I would build a better me. So I did. Delving into all the hurt I had hid since a kid. Anytime I felt the urge, I would hold on. I want to reach the other side. My goal's to be headstrong when right feels dead wrong, when night feels too long, when life feels too long, when hindsight is blinding and reminding us to hold on. You're not alone. We've all been there together. We're facing the storm, because bad weather ain't forever. We're breaking the norm to see if maybe there is more, but we'll never know until we're on the other side of that door. I don't want to use you for anything, abuse you for anything, or lose you to anything. Love is not obsession. There are no strings attached, so I can't love you if I'm like, yeah, but there's a catch. I want freedom from desire, because this moment is real. They speak about courage, but they don't own how they feel. I want to scream truth, just to hear it echo back. I don't need your validation. This is truly where I'm at. See, this poem is for the lost and the found, who've been tossed to the ground, who've been crossed by their friends. Get up, stand your ground again. Make your heart the strongest muscle that you've got, then let it guide you in the dark till you reach the other side.
That's all I got. If there's any questions, I'll take them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben. I haven't seen any questions come into the chat, but we do have 4 minutes. So if you have a question, you are welcome to unmute yourself to ask Ben, or you can throw it in the chat and we can read it off for him. You might have left it just powerful enough, Ben, that we all just need to absorb it.
It's a little bit different than anything I usually talk about, so I hope that some of it connected. I don't talk about this much. I appreciate you guys listening, even if it didn't. Thanks.
No, thank you. I think that was great. And of the faces that I could see and the people that I know, it was connecting and it was hitting. So we
We've got
appreciate
a lot
that so
of
much.
comments now coming in about thanking you and sharing your story and how inspiring it was, and great ways to be able to connect and help their community.
Thank you guys. Keep up the good work out there.